What if I told you that a single piece of metal, operated by men who'd never seen combat before, could decide the fate of an entire invasion? That a firing technique so precise, so devastatingly efficient, could turn the tide of the largest amphibious assault in human history? On June 6, 1944, as thousands of young Americans waded through the blood-red waters of Omaha Beach, something extraordinary was happening just offshore. While the world remembers D-Day for the infantry's courage and the paratroopers' daring, there's another story, one of mathematical precision meeting raw determination. This isn't just about a weapon. It's about the moment when American innovation, born from desperation and refined through courage, created something the enemy had never seen. A technique without a name in any manual, known simply among the men as the pattern. The year was 1944. The United States Navy faced an unprecedented challenge. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Nazi-occupied France, required something no Navy had ever attempted: close-range fire support for troops landing on heavily fortified beaches, while fending off armored counterattacks from the mainland. Destroyers like the USS Frankfurt, USS Harding, and USS Satire would need to become something they were never designed to be: floating artillery batteries capable of surgical precision in shallow, mine-infested waters. The men aboard these ships were young, average age, 23. Most had never fired their guns in anger. Their commanding officers were reservists, teachers, engineers, shopkeepers, men who'd studied naval warfare from books and practice drills off the American coast. And yet, upon them rested a responsibility that would determine whether thousands of their countrymen lived or died on the beaches of Normandy. In the months before D-Day, these crews began to experiment. Out of boredom, frustration, and a quiet sense of dread, they began testing new firing methods that ignored traditional naval doctrine. They discovered that by timing their salvos with precision, adjusting for the ship's roll and the shell's trajectory, they could create a moving wall of explosions, a curtain of steel that advanced across the battlefield like a scythe. It began with Lieutenant Commander James Holey III aboard the Frankfurt. The son of a Navy admiral, Holey had something to prove, but also the imagination to question the manual. During training exercises off the English coast in April and May 1944, he and his men practiced synchronized firing sequences that could walk shells across a target area with terrifying consistency. The spark came from an unlikely source: a gunner's mate named Robert Henderson, a machinist's son from Oklahoma. He understood rhythm, timing, the music of motion. Henderson proposed that if the guns fired not all at once, but in a carefully orchestrated sequence that accounted for the ship's pitch, they could sustain continuous overlapping impacts on the target zone. No pause, no breath, no chance for the enemy to recover. Other destroyer crews were making similar discoveries on their own. Aboard the USS McCook, Lieutenant Ralph Remy called his method ripple fire, a rolling barrage of timed shots. The USS Thompson tested zone shooting, dividing targets into grids and saturating them in turn. To older commanders, it all sounded heretical. Naval tradition prized power over precision, thunder over control. But these men had no time for tradition. They were solving a problem of life and death: how to hit a moving target from a moving platform without killing your own men who were just hundreds of yards ahead. They practiced until the barrels glowed red. They drilled until they could fire blindfolded through rain and exhaustion. Their ships became floating laboratories of lethal mathematics. At the heart of the pattern was a radical new concept: naval gunnery, as close air support from the sea. The goal was not to destroy fortifications outright, but to suppress them, to keep German gunners' heads down long enough for American soldiers to move forward. By staggering shots, calculating flight times, and synchronizing each gun's rhythm to the ship's motion, they achieved something the Germans had never experienced: a storm of precision that left no pause between detonations. For the defenders, it felt as if the sea itself was breathing fire. But the closer the destroyer crews came to perfection, the darker the moral weight became. They weren't just firing at coordinates anymore. They were firing at human beings whose positions they could see through their scopes. German soldiers, some barely older than themselves. Henderson later wrote in his journal, "I felt like an executioner with a mathematics degree. They were transforming war into an equation range, roll, time, yield, solving for survival." When the morning of June 6th arrived, the destroyers took up positions less than 1,000 yards from Omaha Beach, so close they could see the terror and confusion on shore. So close that a single mine could send them to the bottom in seconds. The Frankfurt, Harding, and Satterlee opened fire. Each ship's 5-inch guns roared not in unison, but in rhythm. Gun 1. 3 seconds. Gun 2. Then, Gun 3. Each explosion landed with mathematical precision, marching across the beach like a living wave. The gunners adjusted constantly, accounting for every swell and roll, every infantry advance. The pattern became a symphony of destruction, mechanical, relentless, unstoppable. A German Panzer IV tank that dared to move from cover was bracketed by the first shell, struck by the second, and buried by the third, all within 10 seconds. Concrete bunkers that had survived previous bombardments were obliterated, their firing slits smashed by repeated hits. Machine gun nests vanished in plumes of dust and steel before they could even swing their barrels toward the shore. Captured German officers later said it was like facing a god with perfect aim. The commander of the 352nd Infantry Division said movement was impossible, that his men were pinned to the earth by an invisible hand. One Panzer company of 12 tanks was annihilated in under 2 minutes. For the first time in history, destroyers acted as mobile artillery platforms, precision fire that moved with the troops. The pattern solved a question that had haunted amphibious warfare since Gallipoli: how to protect soldiers between the surf and the sand. From that day forward, the destroyers became the infantry's invisible shield, every ripple of fire calculated to save lives on the ground. Mathematics had become mercy. Yet even mercy comes at a cost. When the smoke cleared, the gunners saw what their precision had done. The devastation was total: trenches erased, bodies unrecognizable. They had done their duty, but some wondered at what price. Was this innovation, or simply more efficient killing? Did precision make death more moral, or merely more clinical? It was a question that haunted many long after the war ended. When the sun rose on June 7th, 1944, the beaches of Normandy were secure. The destroyers, their barrels blistered from continuous fire, withdrew to deeper waters. They had done what no doctrine had prepared them to do, and they had changed naval warfare forever. Within weeks, military analysts were dissecting their methods. What had begun as field improvisation became the new standard of naval gunnery. Every U.S. destroyer, Atlantic or Pacific, began drilling the pattern. But the true legacy wasn't just tactical. It marked a shift in how America waged war, favoring precision, coordination, and ingenuity over brute force. It foreshadowed the future: air support, guided munitions, systems warfare. The destroyer crews of Normandy had built the blueprint for modern combat, yet few of them ever spoke about it. Robert Henderson went home to Oklahoma, running his father's machine shop. James Holney III rose to become Chief of Naval Operations, but he never claimed credit for what he and his men created aboard the Frankfurt. Most gunners simply returned to quiet lives, carrying their memories in silence. Today, if you walk the sands of Omaha Beach, you can still see the scars, the rusted bunkers, the shattered concrete that once defied the sea. Look out toward the horizon and imagine those destroyers, small, fragile, impossibly close to shore, firing in perfect rhythm, not for glory, not for medals, but because they refused to let chaos rule the battlefield. Their story is a reminder that heroism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet man at the gun sight, doing the math that saves a platoon. Sometimes it's the officer who listens to an enlisted man's idea. Sometimes it's innovation born not from ambition, but from fear, refusing to accept that the old ways must cost more lives. They were just sailors on destroyers. It was just a firing pattern. But on June 6th, 1944. It was everything.